Wonderful welcome to another episode here for Sauerkraut, Germany for non-Germans. And last episode around, we took it very lightly, talked about tourist sites in Germany and so on. And as promised or as threatened, this week we're going a bit darker again, meaning we talk about the news, what's happening. And to slowly ease back into the political talk, I figured let's look at the news. Like, which news are out there talking about Germany or what's been talked about in Germany? And of course, the main news are obviously the war in the Ukraine, which makes sense, of course, because we should be talking about this. And there are lots of news out there, lots of articles out there that say, well, what's Germany's role actually in there? And one of those is on dw.com, Deutsche Welle. War in Ukraine, is Germany losing its EU leadership role? And that's a fair question, I believe. So I don't even want to be heard about that question because the thing is, obviously, Germany for a long time now tried to be rather friendly with Russia. Now, before the invasion, of course, because everyone in Germany agrees that the invasion, of course, is ridiculous. Like WTF, right? Sure. But leading up to that, like over the last decades, Germany tried to enforce something they called change by trade. So if we are friendly to Russia and trade with Russia, then we could impact some positive change within Russia, was the idea, right? Now, of course, now that we know what happened with Putin invading Ukraine, you can see that didn't work, of course. Yeah, and now lots of blame goes to Angela Merkel because she was a big proponent of that. She met Putin several times. She spoke Russian with him because she's from Eastern Germany, where she used to learn Russian back in the day. So now, of course, people point the finger at her saying like, yeah, you were too friendly to Putin and so on. While she did it, everyone was like, yeah, maybe that's the right thing to do so that Russia feels included and so on. And Russia also depicted Germany as like a friend within Europe, which was kind of nice-ish. Lots of business being done. Former Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder even being very close friends with Putin actually, and being in lots of boards as the board member for the Nord Stream pipeline, for example, and at Gazprom, the biggest company in Russia that exports gas. And he just stepped down this week from this role, I believe. So, of course, now lots of pundits point fingers at Germany for being too nice to Russia. Of course, lots of people in the Ukraine pointed finger too, which is understandable. And even Russia now changed her stance because now that Germany said, yes, we have to support Ukraine, now Russia vilifies Germany. So Germany basically lost on all sides, which is interesting, right? And the Russian foreign minister the Ukrainian foreign minister in Germany said he thinks that Germany takes that much time with delivering the tanks that they promised, so that a ceasefire will happen, and then Germany don't has to deliver those tanks. So that's what he thinks. So he thinks, especially the new chancellor Olaf Scholz, isn't courageous enough to make more courageous decisions. That's what he thinks. Now, the question is, of course, if Germany is not a leader of Europe, who will be the leader of Europe? Is it going to be Macron? But Macron also faces lots of problems within France, but also outside of France, of course. So who's it going to be is the question, right? So it seems like lots of other countries would have to step up. Maybe it's not just one or two that should lead Europe. Maybe it should be like, as it was thought out to be, that all the countries take charge to some extent. But, well, that remains to be seen. In regards to what Germany is doing, we have to see whether or not Olaf Scholz keeps making courageous decisions, the one that he was forced to make, or if he just sits and waits in order not to offend anyone anymore. Now, in the wake of all this, lots of things are happening, of course. And if you look at a few more war-related news that are happening right now, of course, so Germany said now the tanks will be delivered. The tanks, I think the first 12 tanks or 16 or something like this, tanks will be delivered to Ukraine within July, which is still freaking far off. Like, it's another month without the tanks that Ukraine has to fight off Russia. Germany promised those tanks like months ago, and it's gonna be July now. Of course, they had to be maintained or whatever, right? So you can see why the Ukrainian minister to Germany is rather unhappy with that development right now. Then, while preparing for this talk, for this podcast, I also saw a great article on Politico. And Politico is, always a very woke and very fast to blame people just to get the clicks, and it worked because I clicked on it, and the headline says 12 Germans who got played by Putin, and the subheadline says there's no shortage of politicians, business leaders, and intellectuals who have appeased Moscow over the years. Here are a few of them. So let's just see who Politico is throwing under the bus. Of course, number one is, of course, Angela Merkel, right? Obviously, they say no German is more responsible for the crisis in Ukraine than Merkel. I would like to know I understand where they're coming from, but what would they have written if Merkel and Germany would have told Russia to F off and to hit sanctions on them and so on the past few decades, and then Russia would have pulled the trigger even sooner? What would then Politico would be like? Yeah, the Germans provoked it, and it's the truth because that's what Politico does. But okay, understandable to some extent because I mentioned it just earlier. Second one is Frank-Walter Steinmeier is the current president. The president doesn't have any power in Germany, right? So he's there, and he's also from the Social Democrat Party, and they hate on him understandably because he was trying to force diplomatic solutions in regards to Ukraine, and it's very questionable because he would wanted to concede some parts to Russia, which of course was not okay. Based on that, the Ukrainian president, Mr. Zelensky, also refused to receive Mr. Steinmeier in Kiev, which is also very understandable. So I'm not flying the German flag here. I completely understand and agree with Zelensky's behavior here. Third on the list is Gerhard Schroeder, as mentioned earlier, former chancellor, now in like all those high roles for Nord Stream, Gazprom, and so on, that he just left earlier this week. So this is, of course, the biggest and the most direct link to Russia/Putin, which is really crazy that it took so long for him to take a stance. And now he just took it because the public basically forced his hand here. Then we have Joe Casser, who is one of the chief executives for Siemens, which is, of course, a huge engineering company. He was the chief executive there, I think, until 2021, if I'm not mistaken. He was always courting business in Russia, was very famous for always trying to work with Russia, of course. He even went to Crimea, to Russia, after Russia annexed Crimea. He didn't cancel anything. He went to Moscow to meet Putin after this. So yeah, of course, the ties are very strong and just money talks. But I was about to say, can you blame Siemens or him for it? I mean, yes, you can, but you're not surprised by a big global company doing that, right? Unfortunately. Another one is Wolfgang Reitzle, who is behind Linde, who's the huge gas giant, if you're familiar with it. And of course, he also pushed it into Russia. He also used to work, if Wikipedia serves me right, for BMW before. So a big, powerful resume. And he, of course, also tried to make all the money with Russia. Then there are a few more which are rather funny on the political list, which is the Munich Security Conference, because they also kept inviting Russia to it and let Russia talk about it. Then there's a German platform basically for tapping the Russian market. It's called Ostausschuss, which basically means like the East Committee. It was founded in the 50s and been used to find ways to make money, make business with Russia, which is, of course, interesting. Then there's Matthias Platzek, who's the leader of the Social Democrats from Brandenburg. He's also been in the news just for being pro-Russia, because he actually said on tape basically that he likes like the Russian cinema and things like this, for example, and always try to convince Germany that Russia is no fear. So that's why, of course, he also gets lots of blame there. There's another prime time anchor, if you want to, or TV anchor, who's called Georg Restle, who's also very much pro-Russia. He said that the NATO is the reason why Russia became so aggressive, which is, of course, a talking point that was been elaborated or also repeated in many shows, and he took this stance. Then we have Friedrich Matz, who's the leader of the Conservatives, or one of the leaders of the Conservative parties, of course. And you would think that the Conservatives are all against Russia, but actually, he was for a long time a really pro Russia. He just, I think in 2020 or so, he changed his stance after Mr. Navalny was poisoned in Russia, which was also very famous, if you remember that. But it took a long time to change his stance. Then there's Jürgen Habermas, who's like a very intellectual person in Germany. He's like kind of like a philosopher, kinda, and he's very old already. He's like over 90, I believe. And he just took a stance on, he's saying like Germany was right to not send weapons to Ukraine. And he had like an op-ed where he also tries to explain his stance, and says like our government does the right thing, and being like more introspective and so on. So he's just very, very pro sit and wait rather than being really active. And then lastly on the list is Manuela Schwesig. Manuela Schwesig is also a social democrat, and she's from Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. I think she became the premier, let me check, in 2017 or so. Yeah, she was also involved in the Nord Stream, of course, and she, like, I don't want to say any offensive things, but she also was very much pro this gas pipeline for a long time, and that was kind of like her undoing. That probably also why people started to point a finger towards her of being very much pro Russia. Lots of money basically involved again. So I think while I don't agree with the extreme stance that Politico always takes, of course, on their clickbaity articles, there are some valid points in there. What else? But let's be honest, there's not only the Ukraine going on, of course, which is still the main topic, and we should all care about it, obviously. There's also other things happening in Germany. For example, one farmer is in the news right now because he sues VW Volkswagen over climate change. The German court, however, is like, let's see about this. Did you actually suffer damages from climate change already, or do you only expect them? And that's why you're suing. So that needs to be seen what happens there. The court does not seem to be on the farmer's side just yet. Maybe he should hire Johnny Depp's lawyer. Maybe she could get the court on his side. So that's happening. Then when it comes to the that thing that's happening out there with the people feeling unwell. I don't want to say the word because then it's gonna be censored or flagged on Spotify and on YouTube and whatnot. But you know what's happening. But Germany says like it's not over yet, and there will be mandates had for to force people to get this thing that you're supposed to have. Needs to be now seen, of course, how this is going to be received. The statistics suggest that 76% of Germans have had 2 shots. 60% have already had the booster 2. So let's see about this. The government also said they're going to spend more money on the new versions in case there will be more variants popping up. Okay, I try to explain this without using the actual word. Let's see if we won't get demonetized this time around. Two more things that I prepared for you just to get you up to speed on what happens in Germany. And then next week we do like an analysis deep dive once again, now that we're back in the mix with all things news and so on. So Germany just suffered from a huge storm, actually. Was it a hurricane? No, a tornado, I think. A tornado hit Germany. One person died, 40 people injured. So this still does happen in Germany once in a while, that really big storms hit. You don't really hear this from Germany. You would hear this more from where I record from, because I'm in Thailand right now. So you usually hear this from this area in the world, but in Germany also happens once in a while, big storms hitting, people dying from it, which is very sad, of course. So just so that you know that things like this are also happening in Germany. Okay. Lastly, what the parliament also did this week in Germany, what they also okayed 3 months of cheaper public transport, which is kind of nice, of course. So they just introduced the €9 ticket plan, which is kind of cool. They try to basically cushion the blow of the high energy prices for now consumers, since now, of course, all gas prices and energy prices are skyrocketing. Those tickets are valid on regional trains and buses all across Germany. Availability starts in June, July, and August, and it took quite a while to get the funding down. But now it's okayed, which is kind of cool for, of course, locals and tourists alike. So if you want to have a cheap trip through Germany, pick the €9 ticket. It's not valid for the fast trains, for the intercity trains. I believe usually those tickets are only applicable for they called regional trains, RBs or REs, Regionalbahn, Regional Express. You still can travel all across Germany in those. It just isn't as fast, and you might have to change trains more frequently compared to the intercity trains, the IC or the ICE. But therefore it's way cheaper. So enjoy your trip through Germany, maybe looking at all those sites that we discussed last week. If you do so, let me know how it goes, of course, in June, July, and August. Shout out, follow the podcast, follow the main station at FunkitPod on social media. Email is funkitpod@gmail.com. Like, share, subscribe this thing. Ideally, you also rate it, because if you rate it, more people will find it. We can have bigger, broader discussions with a wider audience, which would be awesome for all of us. All right, that's it for this week for Germany for non-Germans. As always, thanks for joining. Stay safe. Take care.